Man, let me tell you something. Okay, look, here's the thing, man. God, this story's so ridiculously good. All right, check this out. So the Celestial, the Progenitor Celestial, the coming together of all the different Celestials, kind of hodgepodge together more or less, all Frankenstein. This is the moment when it finally offers its judgment, where it decides whether or not the entirety of the human race lives or dies. Now, what this does is this initially opens up with Captain America literally at like Central Park, right? Because that's where the giant X-Men tree is kind of emerged, where you basically have the kind of field base, right? This is where like the New York branch of the X-Men reside, but people are here because people are turning against the X-Men population. Remember, when it came to this whole thing, what's been going on behind the scenes is that you have had the X-Men and you've had the Eternals and you've had the Avengers facing off and kind of joining forces and then turning against each other and so on and so forth. But the other big caveat here is that the picture has been painted that the mutants are why this is all happening in the first place. The other part of this is that humanity has always had a fear of mutants. And so as a result, in this time of desperation, people look to the mutants as being the cause of the problem. Now, the irony of all this is Captain America is trying to talk everybody down. And that's one of the things that we're told, right? The world understands its heroes cannot save them. They must be their own heroes now. They must decide what hero means. And we're told by the Celestial, the tests are real. They cannot be shirked. The world shows its true face, and I watch. Captain America failed his test and prays others do not do likewise. So the man in the flag tries to inspire people to not bludgeon one another to death. There's riots in the streets, riots in the country, riots in the homes, riots in the hearts, and Captain America can't be everywhere. And this is really what the Celestial was hitting at, right? This is what the Progenitor was hitting at in the last video that we did when it analyzed Captain America and called him a failure. Because in reality, Captain America is a hero that people look up to. He's just kind of the center of the superhero community. Everybody respects him, and the average person knows who he is. But in times of desperation, people will believe what they want to believe, and logic will fly out the window in replace of an emotional response. People are angry and they're scared, and in their anger and fear, they will become the worst versions of themselves. Captain America's speeches and talking to them and trying to get people to calm down, it has no bearing whatsoever, so much so that people actually turn against Captain America because their thought is not Captain America is here trying to like talk reason into us and get us to, get the day to calm down. Instead, their Captain America is trying to stand in the way of us destroying the thing that will fix everything. Captain America wants us to die, and in turn they turn on him because of that. And that's the crazy thing, because at this point we switch our attention over to Eros. Now remember, Eros was the revelation of the person the Eternals reached out to effectively save them, and Eros was a guy who could do it. Remember, Eros has the ability to manipulate the emotions of others. He is a pure empath, which means he can live and he can feel the emotions of others in a variety of different ways. The funny thing about this is Eros immediately counters the point of Iron Man and Cersei and those guys when their stance is, Eros, we need you to use your powers in order to basically manipulate the emotions of humanity to essentially instill peace on a global scale, and then the Celestial will have to rule in our favor. Eros' response, that's ridiculous. If I do that, the Celestial will see right through it. He will immediately know what it is that's going on, that he will see that in the moment they are peaceful, but the reality is that in their heart of hearts, that they're still just as terrible as they ever were. What has to be done here in order to bend the Celestial's will to our favor, in order to save our world, is to somehow convince this Celestial that in their heart of hearts, while it may not seem like it, people are inherently good. And so what we end up doing here is actually kind of following the Progenitor as it goes through and starts analyzing people. One of the things it says is that on his way home, angry at the world, Tom passes two other angry men who decide that he looks kind of Eastern European, and they have strong angry opinions about that, and so they beat him up because of it. The response that the Celestial had is Tom spits out a tooth and fails to see the irony, and so he fails, right? The Celestial looks to Luke Cage and says, Luke Cage is mayor. This is his first extinction event. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, when you originally had Kingpin, who was the mayor of New York during like the entire just crazy situation where Kingpin basically tried to take over the city of New York, Luke Cage ran against him, since basically attacking Kingpin would effectively make him a martyr and would turn people to his side. So Luke Cage ran against him and won, and that's how Luke Cage became mayor of New York. If you guys are curious about that, I'll link the playlist to that video down in the description. description. But nonetheless, right, the Progenitor says he poses as a man of the press and asks him, how do you judge your performance as mayor? And the response of Luke Cage is a political answer. Ask me tomorrow, right? Kind of joking about it a little bit and sort of easing the tension. And the response of the Progenitor is, that is not an option. To take no stance is not an option. And he judges against Luke Cage. He then analyzes Thor, and he says Thor Odin's son fights the Femix in orbit. Mutual powers like dueling suns. I observe him closely. I read his hammer's inscription and ascertain a truth. By definition, he must be worthy. So Thor passes the test. And then he looks to Eros. And the funny thing about this is he doesn't pass judgment on Eros. Instead, he watches as Eros just listens to other people. Eros literally travels around the world and hears people's stories, listens to what they have to say, and then just absorbs that information. But the Celestial then turns to Kamala Khan, right, to Miss Marvel, and he says, I appear before Kamala Khan as Captain Marvel, offering her and her family a chance to leave the planet, escape this, and join the secret higher league of Marvel heroes. She pummels me and demands I tell her what I did with the real Carol. She cannot see my hand move in her huge fist, but she passes and I vanish. Now, the cool thing about this, and this is what's so ironic, is it's not just the Progenitor judging superheroes, it's the Progenitor judging everybody. And so one of the things he says is a woman named Katrina leaves her hotel room on her way to a rally. She's 50 meters down the corridor before she realizes she forgot a tip. She looks at the distance back, knows she's late, and decides not to go back and deliver a tip and carries on. And the Progenitor says, I appear to her in the form of her dead aunt with a thumbs down. She's mortified and she asks, what did I do? And I simply just don't tell her. Time and time again, it's the same thing. It appears to Charles Xavier as Legion and says, I need to talk. Charles Xavier does what he's always done, which is blow off his son, and the Celestial judges against him. The Celestial continues to watch Eros. The Celestial judges the Starbrand, judges in favor of her. The Celestial judges a woman named Daniela as Daniela watches all the footage going on. And in that moment, with Daniela's relationship with her mother being strained at the very best, she decides she needs to be there for her mom. She goes home, the Celestial judges in her favor. Now, one of the funny things that happens here is the Celestial appears to Dr. Doom. Now, you guys know how Dr. Doom is, right? You guys know how Victor Von Doom is, right? Literally, the Celestial appears and says, I appear to Victor Von Doom and give him a simple challenge. Say that Reed Richards is smarter than you, and you will pass. He laughs and then laughs some more and then leaves. He passes himself. I concur. Like literally Dr. Doom's like, I'm not taking your stupid test. I decide that I pass. And the Celestial's like, I mean, oh, okay, you know, but it's again, one of those great moments because then it appears to Daredevil, right? And this is one of those interesting things because remember, Daredevil's Catholic, he's a man of faith. And one of the things the Celestial says is Matt Murdock dresses as a devil and tries to stop the streets from becoming hell. He is a man with a firm moral code, which he has violated time and time over. I appear with a crown of thorns and a downturned thumb. Beneath the mask, Matt Murdock weeps. He says, I know, yet he carries on. And that's the crazy thing. It's just one of these amazing and beautiful moments that goes on here. And so ultimately, after everything that's happened, the Celestial continues his judgments of various people and even superheroes across the world. But then you have Eros, who appears to a coming together of the United Nations. And he literally says, okay, for all of you out there, here's the thing to understand. And it's really him learning this. Humanity will not come together just because it's the right thing to do. It's not in the nature of people to do that. The nature of humanity is to be destructive. It's to ruin things, destroy things, not necessarily because it's ingrained in our evolutionary biology, but because it's just what we've been doing for so long, drawing boundaries over pieces of land to differentiate between one nation and another, one human being looking at another and saying, because of your skin color or your gender or what have you, you're different from me and that makes you bad. Just things along those lines, right? As primitive as those ideologies are, Eros came to the realization that humanity has been doing it for so long, it doesn't know anything else. And so using that to his benefit, he approaches the United Nations and says, if you won't come together because it's the right thing to do, then maybe I can just bribe you to do so, right? As it stands right now, the X-Men and the Eternals have technology that you as normal humans simply just don't have. Not only that, if you are willing to come together and bring your countries together and unify in a way that will save our world, then we will also grant you celestial technology, not on a massive scale, but something that will basically help to usher in humanity into a golden age, because the reality is we as Eternals have had this technology for a pretty lengthy amount of time. And for the most part, our unwillingness to share it with you has in a lot of ways been a failure. We could have actually turned Earth into a golden age, but we just never really did for any number of reasons. The X-Men have recently discovered this power and they've kept it selfishly, and the celestial power is out there for humanity to be used. We will guide you. We won't just give it to you arbitrarily, but we will give you the tools you need to move beyond your current primitive standpoint of drawing artificial boundaries that are literally guaranteed by virtue of just yellow marks along the road. And in turn, we will help you become better. And so that's one of the ideas here, is that hopefully it will lead to a unification of humanity. But the other concern here, and the bigger thing they have to deal with, is Uranos. Because remember, Uranos is one of the original Eternals. This guy's so powerful, he showed up on Mars, a planet full of Omega level mutants, and eradicated pretty much everybody, right? Within 1 hour. This guy's on just a whole different level of power, and he's basically being used by Druig, who's the current leader of the Eternals and the one that really instigated this war in the first place. And so the issue the Eternals have to deal with is their numbers are fractured. Their numbers are split. They can't just launch an attack against Druig because he's the leader of the Eternals. It'd be like just assassinating some kind of world leader. You can't do that, right? Because it'll turn the other Eternals against them. And in fact, it'll actually incite a civil war among the Eternals. What they need is for Druig to screw up, to make a mistake, to do something that will basically lead to the other Eternals losing faith in him and then voting him out as the Prime Eternal and voting somebody in his stead. But that's the concern when it comes to dealing with Uranos, because their fear here is that what if Druig will unleash Uranos on Earth itself? What could he possibly do? Like, imagine the amount of damage he could inflict here. Now, the crazy thing about this, and the funny thing about this, is that the entire concern with regards to voting for Druig is limited to the existing Celestials, right? They can at any point in time initiate a vote of no confidence, right? They can at any point in time, the Eternals can come along and say, we call for a vote of no confidence in Druig and we want to elect a new leader. The issue is, if they do that, their numbers are split almost perfectly even. If they were to launch that vote, what it would do is it would lead to effectively the entirety of the Eternal landscape staying exactly as it is right now, because those who voted for Druig are going to vote for him again. Those who voted against him are going to vote against him again. There won't be any real change. What they need is somebody who can turn the tide. And so what happens here is that Druig ultimately summons the Unimind, right? He does this as a means to launch a psychic attack against the Omega level telepaths on Earth in the hopes of annihilating all of them. But in his hubris in doing this, in overlooking and overplaying his hand, what this does is it allows a field team to infiltrate the exclusion zone, right? Remember, the exclusion zone is the great machine of the Eternals. Everything that makes the Eternals who they are is literally confined to that, including the ability to quote unquote hack into the Unimind. And that's exactly what happens, that when the defense systems of the Unimind are effectively down, this allows the mutants to enter into the mind of the Unimind itself. It allows the telepaths to enter in directly. Now, this is a major change when it comes to the nature of mutants in Marvel Comics. Something that I want to establish here is that yes, mutants and deviants do possess similar genes, and basically mutants are descendants of deviants, hence the reason why deviants were able to pass through the Krakoan gates, because the genetic material of deviants and mutants is close enough that they're distant relatives, essentially, right? Mutants are the result of humans with a deviant gene. The difference here is that under any normal circumstance, the Unimind is confined to Eternals only. The mutants are not Eternals here. So under any normal circumstance, the mutants would never be able to enter into the Unimind and then vote for a new Prime Eternal. What's happened here is that by hacking the firewall of the Unimind and in turn allowing other minds to enter into it, that what this does is, with the vote being cast, it cannot be done. It's irrevocable, right? Druig can't say, no, they can't vote because they're mutants, right? It doesn't count. Once the vote is made, the vote is guaranteed. There's no conceivable way to undo it or to change it. It doesn't matter. And so as a result of that, when the mutants vote, they vote in favor of Eros. But what it does is it changes the landscape in that Eros is voted as the new Prime Eternal. The problem with this is that moments before the vote is cast, Druig, in an act of desperation, unleashes Uranos on Earth with the belief that Uranos, in his promise, would basically solve the problem by eliminating the mutant population and ensuring that the forces of Druig would remain in control. What Uranos did was abandon the promise, so the vote went through. The result of this is that Eros becomes the new prime Eternal, and Uranos is now free on Olympia and even free on Earth. The reason why this matters is because, remember, Uranos can tap into the armory of the Eternals. In doing so, quite literally, portals start opening all over the world, and just massive beings of astronomical power begin to show up because of the forces or the power of Uranos to essentially summon them. Now, the crazy thing about this is that no one really knows what to do here, right? Iron Man is like, okay, we have to find a way to essentially utilize the very weapons of Uranos against him, right? What we need is someone out there, man, let me tell you something, what we need is somebody out there that has the ability to seize control of the very metals that Uranos uses for his guns and arms and armament and all that stuff. And as Uranos is gearing up and Uranos is prepping all these massive weapons to start opening fire and unleashing just hellfire on the world itself, the master of magnetism appears, son. Magneto makes his return, baby. Yes, remember, Magneto was one of the people who was thought to have been killed by Uranos on Mars. This guy, right, the power of Magneto, his heart was ripped out of his chest. This guy used his own control over magnetism to keep the blood flowing in his body, to give himself an artificial heart so he could continue fighting. And this guy is incensed. This guy is 8 kinds of pissed. And so when the deal is made, right, like when Tony Stark hacks into the systems, into the entire armory of Uranos, and he's like, Magneto, are you there, right? The response to Magneto is, yes, I'm ready whenever you are, right? Like Tony Stark opens the portals to the various weapons, right? These just massive energy cannons that Uranos has, and then literally all the cannons end up targeting Uranos with the help of Magneto. And in that moment, Magneto's just like, fire! And then just the whole thing just goes off and incinerates Uranos on the spot. Just kills Uranos right there on the spot. Now, one of the things you remember, Eternals never die, they always get resurrected. So the result of this is that yes, Uranos is destroyed in the moment, the momentary issue is quelled. He's sent back to his containment cell where he starts to reconstruct himself, but lest we forget what it was Magneto did. Do not forget here, when it comes to mutants, they can always be resurrected so long as they're in the database. But in order to truly become a member of Araco society, that Magneto deleted himself from the database of Krakoa, meaning if he dies, there's no coming back. And Magneto dies. He had just enough energy to basically keep himself alive, right? Just enough power to keep himself there. And in that moment, he ultimately passes on, right? He ultimately ends up dying. And so as a result of this, the Progenitor Celestial, monitoring everything, right, literally says, this is the moment. Magneto could weaken, he could call out to his old friend who would still save him. I listen, and there is nothing. He does not betray his promise to the Araco people. He truly is a guy who's maintaining his role in Araco, right? Maintaining the deal that was made. He's not a betrayer of his own word. And in turn, the Progenitor says, he sees me as I slip away. I take on the form of the one he thought he lost. She smiles and waves approvingly. If all were like him, there would be no need for men like him. But look, this is of interest to me. And what you end up having is Eros, who approaches the Progenitor Celestial. And the response of Eros is this: look, I have traveled the world and I have talked to all different manner of people. I have spoke to them, I've heard their words, I've made deals with them. And the reality here is that we as people can be better. We can improve, we can be more capable, but we can't do it in a day. We need more than a day. By tomorrow, we can become better. And that's when the Progenitor is like, it's time, right? I do not address the world. I have spoken enough. I have watched enough, and I have judged enough. And I have decided you have all lived enough. If you had 1,000,000 years, you'd never do enough. You'll always be better tomorrow. Tomorrow things will be different. Tomorrow you will improve. It's always tomorrow. It's always tomorrow. It's always tomorrow. And he says, but you don't realize that one day tomorrow would run out. And the Progenitor judges against the entirety of humanity and starts eradicating all life on Earth. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Man, I told you this story was amazing. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.